guys, this is Mr. House coming to you from the Cabot High School Fine Arts, room 130. Thank you for tuning in and joining in. Today what we're going to talk about is some watercolor techniques. There are so many things that we can do with watercolor. I love watercolor simply because the techniques are endless. And it's fairly easy. I think anybody can do it. I think that anybody who has some want to and some try can do this, no doubt. So what I'm going to show you is, first of all, the things that you need when doing all of this. But first and foremost, the main things you need with watercolor are obviously your water. Okay, I've got a big old jar of water. I've got a variety of brushes. So I've got a small brush, itty bitty brush. I've got a medium-sized brush, good flat brush. I've got a good large flat brush. Okay, those are very good to have. And then I've got a sponge brush. Okay, that's going to be used to create some textures later on, but we will get to that. All right. And then the last thing I have on here is paper towels, and I'll pull those over to the side. You always want a good amount of paper towels just because that helps soak up any mistakes. It also helps us dry things, and it helps us dry off our brush in between getting them wet. So I'm going to start out by what this is up here, okay, what you're seeing up here. First of all, obviously, this is going to be the color wheel. Red, red, orange, 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 yellow, yellow, green, green, blue, blue, violet, violet, red, violet. So I did this because I wanted everybody to get an idea of the color spectrum and how that works with watercolor. It's good practice and a good refresher. So I'm just going to give you an example of one. The watercolors I use are these Prang watercolors in my classroom. They're fairly inexpensive and pretty good quality. Used these a lot when I was in college, and the professors didn't seem to notice too much difference. So, but they might have just been very nice. But I've got a fresh palette for us. These come with a brush inside them. However, these brushes are not very good. They are pretty gross, and they're just not very good brushes. The bristles tend to come off when you're painting. It's not something that I like, so we won't use it. So I'm going to put this off to the side over here where I can work with it, and I'll pull it back and forth so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to start with some red right here. Some red. I'm going in for my water, so I'm just going to lay in some water. Okay. I'm going to lay in plenty of water, actually. And I'm going to get a red tone in there. With watercolor, it is best to work from light to dark. You want to start with your light values because light values, what we do with watercolor is the background, the white of the paper is our light values. So you never want to start dark all over because then you'll have a hard time getting your light values back in there. So I've gotten a pretty light tone of red, and I'm just going to paint that in. I'm going to paint my whole block in here with red. Okay? And I'm just being very soft to the touch, making sure I'm staying nice, neat, and tidy in the lines. We all know what nice, neat, and tidy is and what that looks like. Okay, so I have a very light red. Okay, now remember I said I want to work light to dark. That's not quite as dark as I want it, so I'm just coming back and saturating that a little bit more with some more red, and then I'm painting that in. There we go. That's more along the lines of what I want. And while we can paint back in while it's wet, you can paint back in while it's dry. Doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to smooth some of that line work out. Keep it nice and tidy, like I said earlier. Okay, there we go. Now, when I'm transitioning color, obviously, if I want red, orange, I'm going to actually go in and add just yellow to mine. There is an orange on here, but you'll get your truest colors when you mix them from the primaries, which are red, yellow, and blue. So I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to that, and then paint in my red-orange. And the saturation seems to be pretty nice on here, so I'm not concerned about that either. Smooth it out. Alright, then we have our red-orange. And I can keep moving on and on and on, but for the sake of time, I want us to go on and look at all of these techniques and what they are and what they mean and how they work. So, a flat wash. Flat wash is very simple, okay? One tone all the way across. I'm going to use my big wide brush for that because it works quicker and it'll do what we want it to do. So, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to wet my palette, okay? I'm going to just get it wet. And I'm going to go down with some green. Okay? And I'm going to saturate that pretty well. Okay. So I've got my brush loaded. And I'm just going to go flat edge to the side. I'm going to flip my brush because it helps. You have just as much paint loaded on the other side of the brush, and we don't want to waste paint. Coming back for more. The goal here is for all of this to be uniform and one solid tone all the way across. Okay? We basically did that with this up here. I just didn't tell you that. I'm being a little trickster. Okay. Alright, so we've got a good flat wash. Same thing all the way across. Now, graded wash. A graded wash is where we want to actually go from a darker value down to a lighter value. If you remember me saying earlier, the white of the paper is our light value. So we have to saturate and pull down. For this, I want to use a medium-sized brush because I want to get the most transition that I possibly can. You know, why don't we go in and get some yellow? I'm going to go in here and saturate this with some water. I'm going to grab some yellow, and I'm going to put quite a bit of yellow in there. Okay? Now, I want to go right over here, and I'm going to press in and pull across. Okay? I'm going to flip and do that one more time below it. Okay? And then I'm going to wash my brush off a little bit. And then I just want to pull this value down. Until we go all the way white along the bottom. So, let me pull that close. So we see it going from a darker yellow down to a lighter yellow until we get all the way to a white. And I'm just working that in a little bit more. Okay? So that's a transition of value. Transition. Wet and wet. Okay? This is really fun. I'm going to go on to my palette. I'm going to rinse my brush out really well. I'm going to go on here and I'm just going to go ahead and just get water on there. Lots of water. Okay? Lots of water. So, it is wet. Now, I already have on my palette some red here. Some red-orange actually. So I'm just going to resaturate that. And then I can just drop in to this. And you see it starting to spread. I'm going to saturate just a little bit more. And really let that do its own work. I can work in some areas if I want. I can leave some ends loose like we see over there. Okay. Now, I can come in with alternating colors if I want. Now, complementary colors are colors that are right across from each other on the color wheel. Red is directly across from green, so if I did green there, what would happen is they would neutralize because because complements neutralize one another. They make those brown tones. Not exactly what you want all the time. So in this case, what I'm going to do is find something that's just close to it on the color wheel. For instance, a yellow. A yellow is pretty close to it on the color wheel. So I'm going to go grab some yellow and drop in there. And a lot of times those colors will just intermingle. And that's okay. That's the wet and wet approach. Letting those tones intermingle. I can come back with some more red on this end if I want and let it intermingle with the yellow. But we're just dropping in color. To me, it's similar to tie-dye. Very good for if you're wanting kind of a hazy sky, like a Lion King sky, with those red and oranges, or if you want adding in some blues, just for a blue sky. Now, variegated wash. Okay, this is when we are actually taking two colors and blending them together. Okay, a good transition, a solid transition. I want to do again like colors, some that are just analogous, close to each other on the color wheel. Not necessarily ones that are directly across from each other. Those are complements, and those will cause a muddy mess when they get to the middle. So be careful of that. Now, I've got some yellow on here, so why don't I start with yellow since I have it on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this similar to a graded wash like we did at the top. And I'm going to go on and add in my tone, my first line, and then flip it. And then I'm going to go up here and rinse my brush out. And then I'm going to pull that down all the way to the bottom. Okay? So we have the same thing here. We have a graded wash, except now we're going to go on the bottom with an alternating color and pull back up, and that's going to be the variegation. So here I go. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to get my green, plop down some green. I'm going to go at the bottom, get my line of green in there. Okay, flip it again. Then I'm going to rinse my brush off. Make sure it's very clean. And then I'm going to pull up into the yellow. And then you have a subtle transition of color. Okay? The yellow transitioning into the green and the green transitioning into the yellow, which is exactly what we want. Alright, glazed wash. What is that? Why do we do it? Glazed wash is pretty easy. It deals directly with the layering of value. So we have to get some tones on here that we'll be able to dry. I'm going to use my red. I'm going to get my primary colors on here. Red. And I'm just going to make a line of red right down the center here. I'm going to rinse my brush out. I'm going to get my yellow. I'm going to do a line of yellow right there. I'm going to rinse my brush out again. Then I'm going to get some blue. Blue is something we haven't worked with just yet. So I've got to mix it up over here. Alright, and then I'm going to do a line of blue. Okay, I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come back to it. Now, up here, we have embossed. Okay, embossed is pretty cool. So I can go in here and get a flat wash if I want. Let's do a flat wash of that red. Okay, I'm going to saturate it pretty well. Let me show you what I'm doing here. I'm going to saturate it pretty well because I want a pretty good strong tone on the back. And then I'm going to paint in. for me, I'm just going to get a flat wash in here. I think that's all I need for this. Okay. Now I can take the back of something, for instance, the back of a brush, or if you have something that's got a kind of rounded tip that you know you can press in, and I'm going to actually do some pressing in with this. So now it becomes embossed. What's happening is we have created grooves for the pigment or the color to settle into. So I've made grooves for that. And to me, it's kind of like a moat around a castle. There's a groove there for water to settle into, and it saturates more of the color pigment. So we see that right there. Okay, scratch out is something that I'm going to have to come back to. I'm just going to put a flat wash in there. I've got green on my palette already, so I'm just going to go in here and paint in some green, and I want to let that dry really well. I'm going to saturate that just a bit more. Okay, I got it a little bit more wet than I want, so I can go back in with my paper towel and always blot up. I'm going to dry my brush off and then go back over. There we go. It'll just dry quicker for me. It would have been fine the other way. This will just help it dry a little faster so that we can get through this video. Alright, plastic wrap is pretty awesome. I'm going to come back to it though, simply because it's got some stuff that we have to do with the majority of the paper. Soap. I absolutely love soap. It creates a very bubbly and can also create a very soft technique in what we are making. So let's do some blue since I already have it here. So I have blue right here. I'm going to saturate it a little bit more. Now, in that blue, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab just some dish soap. Okay, I have just the cheapest kind I could find in the biggest bottle I could find. Ajax, it's the cheap stuff, but hey, it all works the same to me. Okay, now if you saw me, I just poured some of that in. I'm going to mix in that to my blue pigment. And I want this to get sudsy and bubbly. So, I know it's kind of hard to see on here, but it is pretty sudsy on my end of things. Alright, and then I'm going to go in here and paint that in. However I want. I can paint it in layers. It's going to have a very soft technique. It's going to feel very different. It's going to feel thick when you're painting with it. Okay. This is without it being bubbly. Creates a very soft approach. I'm going to mix some of that in with my yellow, and I'll blend the two so it blends softly and subtly. Very nice transition of value. I can go back in and saturate some areas more than others. And notice how much smoother this blends. It doesn't really get away from me. It almost contains. However, it is soap, so if you work into it a lot, it's going to suds up. Very gentle and soft approach. Blends easy, dries a little bit slower. Okay, pull that up close so you can see. Very soft, very subtle. Now, the bottom here is resist. Resist is a good one because what it can do is, remember, I said it, I'll say it again, and I said it earlier, the white of the paper is what you use for your light value. You're not actually using white paint. So some areas that you might have extreme highlights, for instance, like in the iris of the eye, when you see that reflection, or if you're looking at glass and you see those high intense reflections that are totally white, that helps us to leave those areas out. Okay, so the scratch out is dry, so I can go in here and scratch that out. I'm using the sharp edge of a razor knife, and I can almost draw with that. I can do hatching techniques. This is, to me, if you have a highlight that you need, like a quick pop of light, we can go in there and add that. I'm creating that bottle top again that I created earlier. You don't want to carve out giant chunks, and you definitely don't want to go back and work into it, because it's just not going to do, and it's not going to hold the paint as well as it did before it was scratched out. So you can see I've gone in there and scratched out areas of light value where I've needed it. Okay. So our resist is still drying. Mixed media is very, very fun and different. Generally, pen and ink work well together. With watercolor, it's a good marriage of the two medias. So I'm going to go in here and show you how to layer in Sharpie. You can do it however you want. I'm going to go in here and create, hey, maybe I create that bottle cap, bottle top again. I'm just using basic hatching and cross-hatching techniques to get my value. Maybe I create some bubbles out here with some value. Maybe I create a raindrop, I don't know. Okay. The awesome thing about Sharpie is that it doesn't bleed when you paint over it with watercolor. So I'm going to come in here and why don't I grab some blue? I don't have any blue up there. So I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to grab some blue. And I'll paint that in. Notice the Sharpie doesn't bleed when the water hits it. Micron pigments work the same way. Zig pens work the same way. Regular store-bought pens, like just a ballpoint pen or a gel pen, those will bleed. Okay, so there's that. Stamping, super easy. Okay, find something that you want to stamp with. I have a cut-up green pad, and I can go in here and grab. I'll just grab some yellow. Okay, I'm gonna make sure it's damp. Make sure I've got a little dampness on it, and I can go in here and actually just stamp out some patterns. I can alternate my color with some green. and I can go in and stamp different things. I can let it dry and do more of a dry stamping if I wanted. But it just leaves texture for us to work with. So, stamping. I can take, for instance, anything, the cap of this Sharpie pen, I can dip in my pigment and I can stamp with it. It'll emboss the surface, do some different things for you. Splatter is real simple. You can do that two ways. Way number one is to get some pigment down. So I've got some red. Okay. Now, you want a really dry brush like this. Okay, good and dry. You can go back in there with, let's say some yellow. And I can just splatter that back in there. I can grab some yellow and do the same thing on a dry surface. And I can alternate color if I want. Get some green splatter going. This has a very wet and wet method. This has more of a just splatter on white method. Salt, super cool. Let's go in. Let's get some red in here. I've highly saturated this because I want the salt to do its job. Here's what salt does. Salt actually pulls out pigment, soaks it up. If you're looking for like a starry night sky or a galaxy type of situation, then you can come in here with salt while it's wet and just sprinkle the salt right over the top. Alright, notice what the salt is doing. It's pulling that pigment up and it's leaving areas white, and when we scrape it off, it'll leave little white speckles, which is what we want. Dry brush. Make sure you have a very, very dry brush. I'm getting this as dry as I possibly can. Okay? And then I'm going in and getting some color that I already have. Grass is usually something that you do with dry brush. So I've got a little bit of color on there, and then, but not a lot of water, and no water on the surface at all. And now I'm just pulling up that dry texture. Creates those wispy edges. I can turn it on its side, create longer ones. I can come back for more pigment so long as my brush is still dry. So there's your dry brush technique. I'm going to go on and lay down the pigment for the plastic wrap. I'm going to lay that in there. I've just got some cling wrap, okay, store-bought. I'm going to lay it over the top of this and scrunch it. Now what happens is the water will cling to the plastic that's touching the surface, and the plastic that is not touching the surface, it has white areas left, and it will dry that way and we'll be able to pull it off. I'm going to paint over my resist. Let's get some red. Going to paint right over my resist here. Then I'm going to want to let that dry. Now notice what's happened here is the watercolor has avoided anything that has that rubber cement on it. While those are drying, let's go over here and go to our glazed wash, because that's the final thing I want to show you before I pull everything up on everything else. Let's go back with our primaries. I'm going to hit it with red on the top. Rinse my brush off. I'm going to hit some blue. Then some yellow on the bottom. Okay. So let's look at our glazed wash. Went over with my primaries. Notice what happens here. Where the red crosses over the yellow, it comes across as orange. Where the red crosses over the blue, it comes across as violet. So what happens is when you layer color, you can blend color without actually blending it on your palette. So let's move on. Let's pull up our plastic wrap. So we can see what is left right there. Very cool. You can go back and work into that. I want to show you a reference of another one that I've done. If you let it dry longer, it will come across more like that. So very cool methods there. Salt. Let's go in and brush that off. I still have salt on the surface. You have to wait till that salt is dry and then the surface is dry. Okay, so look at what that's done. Very, very cool. And then my favorite is rubber cement. So now I can just rub with my fingers until all of that rubber cement comes off. I can pull the tape up with my fingers. So where the tape was, it was left white. Where the rubber cement was, it was left white. Okay, so that does it for Watercolor Techniques. Just a quick recap. Got our flat wash, one flat wash, embossed, going into the wet surface and pressing in so that water will pool into certain areas. Mixed media, that's where I mixed Sharpie marker with our watercolor, and you can see that it didn't bleed. Graded wash, going from dark to light. Scratch out, taking out pops of light that you need. Stamping, taking anything and just working into the surface. It can be literally anything that you want to stamp with. Wet and wet, okay, very much like tie-dye. Dropping in watercolor pigment to a wet surface. Plastic wrap, splatter, variegated wash, blending those two colors. Soap, which is very soft as you can see. Salt, which leaves that very cool texture. Glazed wash, which we just talked about. Resist, and dry brush. Okay, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Come back next time.